Welcome to episode 12 of the Goldenberg Destiny Project. We're entering the biblical period, and it is not my purpose in these sessions to review all of the information that's readily available in the Torah and the Chumash. Open it up and see everything. All I want to do here is to give you some historical context of the major events and some insight into what was their significance. So in the beginning, the population of the world was small, and people, little by little, as the population grew, people organized into villages and into towns, and as it grew even more, they formed city-states. They needed to have a structure because of public works. For instance, they needed to make irrigation systems. Irrigation systems involve a lot of logistics and investment, so you had to have a government that would collect taxes and hire the people and manage the project. So that was very important to have a state. It was also important to have a state for defense. You know, you have a few farms and people and stores, but what happens if raiders come and they know what's going to protect you? So you needed to have a state that could have police and soldiers that would protect you. And the states, they organized into city-states, and they built also walled cities. And the walled cities were at the center, and they were where the government sat. And people could, in times of war, people could run into the walled cities for protection. And the states were run by kings. Everybody that was, every ruler, they were usually dynastic, that was hereditary. And every ruler who presided over a city, he was a king. So when you hear about many kings, it's not in the way that we think of kings of whole countries. It was a king of a town, of a city, of a sizable city that could have a walled, that could build, even to build a city, to build the walls is a major project that was needed to have a state. This map is, it shows you where the areas of dense settlement were, where there were towns and city-states. And in the green area, in the outlying areas, they had people lived there, farms isolated, but maybe small villages. But in here, this was the growth of city-states. And in here, this is the Nile River and the Nile Delta. And they had cities over here. And this is Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is modern-day Iraq. And the land between Mesopotamia is a Greek word. It means the land between the two rivers being the Euphrates and the Tigris. Now, at the very bottom of Mesopotamia, you have a city called Ur. It's called Ur Kasdim. Ur Kasdim means that the city was founded on the name of Ur, who was the son of Kesed. And that's what it's called, Ur Kasdim. It was a port on the Persian Gulf and was an important city. And these cities joined together into empires. That means when you have a group of city-states, then usually the most powerful of the city-state would become dominant of this whole group, and that would be an empire. So there were empires here, Sumer and Akkad, and later years Babylon and Assyria. But at this time, the time of Avraham Avinu, it was Sumerian. So Ur, it was a port on the Persian Gulf, was a Sumerian city. And it was a very important city. It was an imperial city. It was a major city. They had very marketplaces. They sold different products, different manufacturing. They had metalworking and pottery. And at the center of Ur, there was a structure called a ziggurat. The ziggurat was like a pyramid with a flat top. So it was a rectangular pyramid. It was huge. It was made of mud bricks, and it had staircases going up to the flat top. And on the flat top there was another smaller period, and then went to the top of that period, you came to a temple. And this structure was the pagan temple to the gods of Ur. You have to understand that that was the heart of the city, was its pagan temple. The pagan cult of the city was involved in everything. The king ruled. The king ruled with the authority of the god race. The employment of the city was very much involved with the temple, with pagan cult, the economy, everything. How many people were employed here? They had priests. They had people that provided the sacrifices. You had support people. It was the whole economy. Everything was revolved around this pagan cult. So this is what the city of Ur was, a very major pagan city. Avraham Avinu was born in Ur. He was born to Terach. Terach was a very prominent pagan. He was a manufacturer of idols, which represented, the gods of the god race, the many gods. And he grew up as a pagan. But inside, he felt that by nature he was a man of truth. And he was not comfortable with being a pagan, but he was part of it. At the time he got to when he was 40 years old, according to the Rambam, Avram had his epiphany when he was 40. So, as we discussed earlier in chapter 3, that the Medrash gives this example of a man walking in the countryside and he sees a palace very brightly lit. And the dark countryside is brightly lit. So I'm not going to get into it extensively, but he saw in this a metaphor that the world exists in a vast infinity. The world is a finite, glittering building, but it's not everything. There's everything. It's infinite, and the infinite, the Ein Sof, that is God. God is the infinite, and God preceded the world. And what he did was immediately, he didn't keep quiet and keep this realization for himself. He went out and started preaching and giving speeches. He went into all the public squares, and he told the people that the God race was fake. There was no such thing as the gods. There was only one God. There was nothing else besides God. And Avram was a very imposing person. He was tall, and he was magnificent. He was a tremendous speaker. He was very charismatic. He was brilliant, and he was also very passionate. And he conveyed his passion, and he was persuasive. And he got up there and he said, people, what are you doing? Cast off the chains of these God rays. There's no God rays. You're living in an illusion. What are you doing? You're just, you're living like lower creatures, as we spoke, or people that are subservient to the God race. But the God race is only your imagination. Be human. Be great. Be aspired to greatness. Come close to God. And he was having an effect. People were listening to it. He was persuasive. So, but this couldn't be accepted, because what he was doing was not just giving religious ideas. He was really fomenting a revolution, because this would turn over the whole city. The whole empire would be turned over for this. If this was allowed to go on, the whole empire would be turned over. The economy would be destroyed. The pagan cult would be destroyed. The kings would have no authority to rule. Everything would be overturned. It could not be tolerated. So he was persecuted. They was attempted to kill him, and he had to flee for his life. So he fled from Ur, and he went to the north, all the way to into Syria to a city called Harran. Now, before we talk about what happened in Harran, I'd like to raise another point. Avram was not the only person in the world who believed in God. He wasn't the only one. There were also other people. There was Shem, there was Aver. Over the years, there was Mesushelach and other people, and none of them went ahead and Noach went and he told people that the world is going to be a calamity, and I'm building an ark, I'm building a teva. But he didn't go around proselytizing and telling people that, trying to bring them close to God. He didn't do that. He lived a private life. Shem had a small little yeshiva. I don't know how big it was, but I was once in Sfas and I came to a place, the yeshiva of Aver. It's probably just for the tourists, but there was a very small cave, and so he had a number of disciples, a number of talmidim, and he taught them whatever he taught them, and that was it. But they didn't go out and try to proclaim to the world that the whole world is mad, the whole world has gone off the rails, you've all become pagans, believing in all these silly gods. He didn't do that. Why Avram did? So what was the difference? So I think that, well, for one thing, on Esha Torah, Rabbi Noach Weinberg is completely staffed by Balei Tshuva. All the people that do the outreach in Esha Torah, and I think for the most part in Har Sameach as well, the people are mostly Balei Tshuva who've come from that world, and they've had their realization, their epiphany, they've come to discover the truth, and it's much more effective when people who come from that world go out and teach than people who come from a different world, completely insular world, which they don't really understand that world, they don't come from it, they don't relate to it, so people are not as receptive to such people as they would be to somebody who comes from their own background. So Avram had that advantage. But it was more than that, because Shem, without question, if he would have seen somebody attempting murder or attempting robbery, he would have told him, listen, don't do that. This is wrong, don't do that. But if you see somebody attempting to go to a pagan temple and pray to the gods, what's he going to do? He's going to tell them it's wrong? This is something which, they wouldn't even understand what he was saying. What do you mean it's wrong? It's not, he was like, Tinuk Shenishba means like a child that's abducted and grows up not knowing anything about the Torah. So there's one opinion of the Gemara says that he's still a shogeg because the knowledge exists in the world, just that this particular person doesn't have it. But at that time, the knowledge of God was gone from the world. Nobody knew anything about God. So there was no point in going out and trying to stop them from doing sins. That's not what Avram was doing. He wasn't going out there to stop people from sinning. He was a revolutionary. He was out there to change the world, to make the world the way God wanted the world to be. That's what he was doing. And Shem and those the people were not. Avram was a revolutionary. He was an iconoclast. He went out there and he says, this is the world. It's ridiculous and crazy, but this is the world, and I am going to change it. This was Avram. So he went to Harran. Harran was at the edge of the map I showed you before, the green area. Harran was all the way at the very top at the edge, and it was not at the heart of the empire. So what Avram did in Harran was not as troublesome for the empire as what he was trying to do in Ur, at the heart of the empire. So Avram went back to his business, and he went out and he was preaching and not speaking and going out there and getting people to realize that there's a God in the world, and he was very effective. How many? The pasuk says, "Hanefesh asher asa b'Harran," the people that he formed in Harran. These are the people that he brought close to the Rebbeinu Shalom. These are people that he was Mekarev. How many were there? It's hard to know. The Rambam, in the beginning of Avodah Zarah, when he talks about this, the Rambam says there were alofim or avovos. thousands and tens of thousands. That's a big number, so I don't know if he actually was that many, or maybe it's just an expression. That there were thousands and tens of thousands means there were multitudes. How many multitudes mean? Does it mean 500? Does it mean 5,000? I don't know, but it was very many. Considering at that time that the world was not so big, so if you were able to get a very big, a sizable following, it meant something. It was effective. What happened to all these people that became his followers? They moved in with his encampment. They brought their families. They made like it was like a town. It wasn't just Avram and his family, a town of his followers, his students, his disciples. It was a sizable encampment. And what happened to all these people? They disappear from history. They disappear. They were maybe they were with him they followed him on his later travels, but what happened to them? When you go down further in a century, 2 centuries, there's no mention of them. They're not there. They're not there. What happened to them? So really, what I think what happened to them, it didn't last. So I'd like to give an example for this of what's required to be Jewish, to be a Talmud of Avram. Let's say somebody has to plead for mercy. He has to go to a judge and plead for mercy. So he knows he's going to go to this judge, and he's going to stand there in front of the judge and plead for mercy. And he knows that the judge is a tough judge, not such a tough judge. He's a lenient judge, and he's going to stand there and look at the judge, and he'll talk to him, and he'll say, "Your Honor, I have remorse. Please, don't punish me." And that's what he's going to do. Now let's say that in order to plead for mercy, you have to go into something I call a pleading room. That means that you walk into a room, and on all 4 sides there's a panel. There are 4 panels, and behind the panels, that's where the judge or judges sit. When you walk into that room, you don't know if there's 1 judge or 2 judges or 10 judges. You don't know if they're men or women, black or white, tall or short, young or old. You know nothing about these judges. You know that you're in a room and you have to plead, and you know that behind that panel, your plea will be heard. And you go and you make your plea for mercy. So in that case, your plea cannot be to a judge, because you don't see the judge, you don't know the judge, you don't know what he is, you don't know who he is. Your plea has to be focused from yourself. You know that there's a to. You know that your plea is going to a judge or judges, but you can't focus on that, because what does that mean? But you can focus on yourself. You could express your remorse and say what you have to say, with the knowledge that it will be heard by judges. But you cannot try to persuade a judge that you don't know you don't see him. So you can't work with the to part. You have to work with the from part. This is what it's like with God. God is unknowable. We have no idea who he is. We have no idea what he's like. His essence is completely unknown to us. He is the infinite. He is the Ein Sof. He is the Einod Milvado. There's nothing else. It's hard to do that. It's hard to plead with the infinite. It's hard to plead with existence. So this is a very difficult thing to do. So what we have to train ourselves to recognize God, to understand what we know about God, to understand what we know about the purpose of creation, that the purpose of creation is that we should recognize God, that the painting should recognize the painter. We have to understand this, and then we have to focus on ourselves and do what God expects from us. But to have a direct, try to talk to him, to persuade him in the way we would persuade a judge in a courtroom. That cannot be done. And this is very, very difficult. So over time, the people, his followers, they couldn't maintain that. Maybe the early ones that sat in front of Avram, that sat in front of him and was so mesmerized by his charisma and by the force of his personality and by his passion, maybe these people were able to be inspired enough to carry that through and live that way. But as time went on, and the next generation and the next generation, it got weaker and weaker until they vanished. So when he was in Harran, if he was there for a long time, God told him, God came to him in a prophecy. This is the first time that he spoke to him. And since we're speaking, we're doing history, and we're doing history from the perspective of classical Judaism, so God plays a part in this. It's all about God. And prophecy exists, and the supernatural exists. You open the history book, you will not find the prophecy in the history books. You'll not find the supernatural in the history book. That's religion. In other words, they mean that's myth. That's not real, it's not true. It's just religion. But from the perspective of classical Judaism, it's not myth. It's the reality. God exists, God gave us the Torah, God spoke to us, God continued to speak to prophets, God did, at certain times, God did certain supernatural things. So when we speak about history in the context of this project, the Destiny Project, then the supernatural is part of history, prophecy is part of history. And we know about it because it says in the Torah, which we know is true, as we explained. So God came to Avram and he told him, Lech lecha me'artzecha me'miladecha la'eretz asher, go from your land, from your birthplace, and go to the land I will show you. And this is when he left Harran and he went to Canaan, and he said, Ve'ezcha l'goy gadol, I will make you into a great nation. This is when he promised him that that his descendants would form the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. And the real effective way that Avram would change the world, which he wanted to, was not through his gathering around him many followers. That would not ultimately accomplish the goal that he wanted, which was to change the world. It would not. What would accomplish that would be to build a nation of his descendants on the foundations that he laid, and he and the other of his laid, and that nation would be strong and steadfast in the Rebbeinu Shalom, and that nation would be L'or Amim, it would be a light to all the nations, and this, the example of the Jewish people, that would bring about the change of the entire world. The chosen people doesn't mean that his descendants would be racially or ethnically chosen and superior to other people. The chosen people means that this nation would have a covenant with God, and they would have a mission as a nation to bring about to bring knowledge of God to the entire world. That's their mission. And everybody is welcome. I mean, we don't go out and missionize and proselytize and try to get people to convert, but the door is open to converts, and anybody who, from any race, any creed, any ethnicity, any color, who wants to join this nation can do so. So the chosenness is not exclusive. It doesn't exclude other people. The chosenness is the assumption of a very heavy burden of responsibility, that the Jewish people have the responsibility of being the champions of God in this world, the ones who stand for the knowledge of God and will bring knowledge of God to the entire world. Now, just going back to the people in Harran, so it would seem it would seem, that all these people, since it didn't last, that it was a failure, that this thing didn't work. And, so God told him, listen, this doesn't work. We're going to do the other thing which will work. But he spent a long time with Harran, working hard, and why, if that wasn't going to work, so why didn't God tell him right away, go to Canaan, go to this land I will show you, and I'll make you into a nation? Why did he leave him there for decades, going out and preaching and talking and drawing people to him? What was the purpose of it if in the end the whole thing wouldn't work? So I think that we can understand this based on what we spoke about, I think it was in episode 10, about the development of paganism. That the final straw of paganism was, the Rambam says, "V'Hashem hanichbad v'hanoira nishtakach mepi kol," that the name of God was forgotten and nobody in the world knew of the existence of God. Not in any way. They didn't even know his name. That was when paganism became complete. I think what Avram did accomplish was he reintroduced the idea of God into the world. And even though these people reverted to paganism, but the name of God remained in the world. People still knew that God existed. You see in the Chumash that when Avram was with Avimelech has a dream, and God came and he spoke to him. That was God. It wasn't one of his pagan God race people. It was God. You see Lavan, who was a pagan living in Harran, and he also talks to Yaakov about God told him that he shouldn't harm him. Bilam, the Syrian seer, where he comes to Balak, the king of Moab, and he tells him that he has communication with God. So that means God was known, but the people could not worship him. They could not deal with him. They couldn't pray to him because he was too distant and too unknown. So, but the force of paganism was diluted. Even today in India, we have the Hindu religion, which is very polytheistic with numerous gods and goddesses. But the Hindus believe that there is a superior god called Brahman, who is unknowable, the maker of everything. That is really the idea of God. But they don't pray to him. They don't worship him because he's not knowable. But that he exists, that they know. So I think though Avram accomplished that God allowed him to be in Harran for decades, to spread the word and to teach. So all these disciples of his understood that there is a God. They realized that there is a God. And they passed that on to their descendants and the other people and people that they influenced all around the world. But they could not practice that kind of religion. It was too hard for them. So they had to have intermediaries and the pagan gods, and they slipped back into the god race, but they still knew that above everything else, there was an unknowable God. Thank you very much.